So welcome, I've crawled out of my nerdy hole to review Eyes of Wakanda. So I will not lie, I completely forgot that this was releasing. I knew that it was releasing like in August, but I didn't really know when. And I only really knew about it because of last year they released like the end of year trailer after Deadpool and Wolverine released, where it was like that trailer where Deadpool was watching all of the future projects on the TVA monitors. And one of those projects that was advertised was like Wonder Man, Daredevil, and then Eyes of Wakanda. So that's how I knew that it was happening, and I knew that, we've got Eyes of Wakanda and we've got Marvel Zombies this year. However, so like earlier on in the year when Ironheart came out, there was a lot of debate and a lot of claims that Ironheart wasn't advertised. Ironheart was advertised. There were double-decker buses going around the UK with Ironheart promotions on the side, and there were Ironheart trailers playing in front of films like Superman, films like Ballerina. Those were the two films that I went to go see like prior to Fantastic Four. They didn't play it in front of Fantastic Four, and they didn't play it in front of Jurassic World Rebirth, but they played it in front of Superman and they played it in front of Ballerina, which I think counts as being advertised. This, however, I don't remember seeing a trailer for it. I don't remember seeing anything for it, really, other than, like, maybe some Instagram posts. So this one, much more of a valid argument for they are just dumping this on the streaming network. But yeah, I watched the first two episodes last night, and then I watched the other two episodes today. I couldn't sit down and watch all four of them at once in like a binge, because I just did not have the attention span for it. But there were only 4 episodes that were half an hour long, roughly like 25 minutes when you factor in like the credits and things. And we're going to break it down. We're going to talk about each episode. We're going to talk about like my overall review for it, the same format that we did for Ironheart. And yeah, so let's jump into it. So it followed an anthology format. For those that don't know, it basically means that every single episode is pretty much its own thing. But then it all kind of tied together at the end, which I thought was quite nice. I didn't expect it to be an anthology at all. I went into this expecting, like, when we get to the first episode, and we'll go into it a little bit more detail, but I thought the story for the first episode was the story for all 4 episodes. So I was quite surprised when it wasn't. And it was a little bit jarring because the first episode moved very quick, and I was like, holy shit, we're dealing with a lot of stuff that I thought was going to take a lot longer. But the general idea is that a lot of artifacts have been stolen from Wakanda either a long time ago or over the years, and they've made it out into the open world, and Wakanda want to bring it back into, bring those anthologies back, bring those artifacts back, and preserve them because they're part of Wakanda's history and part of Wakanda's culture. And, that's a big thing with, like, people have spoken about the British, cultural appropriation, colonization, that kind of thing. And this does its take on that. And, Wakanda going back out there to reclaim things that belong to its culture, to try and preserve its culture. So I'm sure that this show will get branded as being woke. I've already seen people talking about the Iron Fist being woke. It's a Kugler project. It's the world that we live in. Get over it. It's comic books. So the first episode followed the Lion, which was the villain of the episode, and our protagonist Noni, and it introduced the War Dogs of Wakanda. And it sort of showed that within Wakanda there are these little groups that form Wakanda. And you've got like the Dora Milaje, you've got the War Dogs. I think there's another group in there that is more recognised in the comics, but has appeared in a film, and I can't remember the name of it, but it begins with a D. But yeah, the whole plot for this is that the Dora Milaje are sending out a former member of theirs to go out and retrieve artifacts that the Lion has stolen. And this one takes place, I think, the earliest, and is the kind of catalyst for why all of these artifacts are out there. At least that's what I got from it, was that the Lion is the one that stole all of these, and when he's defeated, Noni isn't able to retrieve all of them. She is able to get his mask, but a lot of the other ones are lost, and then, throughout the show, they're picked back up in different places. So this was It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad at all. I went into this with very, very low expectations, I won't lie. I have not rewatched Black Panther 1 since the first time I watched it. I don't think I really enjoyed it too much. I did enjoy Wakanda Forever, mostly for like the Namor and Shuri's mum and M'Baku. I like those characters a lot, and Okoye. Those are like the characters related to Wakanda that I enjoy a lot. I never got a chance to really connect to T'Challa too much before Boseman's passing. So my connection to Wakanda is very much like Wakanda Forever and not a lot else that is kind of like adjacent to it. But this did, for me, I think, a good job of like fleshing out Wakanda and explaining what they've been up to over the years, over the centuries, and the reason why we haven't seen them up until we're like 8 years into the MCU by the time Black Panther pops up in Civil War. And it talks about, how they're protected and they're secretive and they like to keep to themselves and they don't interfere, and it's part of their decrees that they don't get involved with the outside world. And that's like a running commentary throughout this, but at the same time they're also getting involved to get these artifacts back. So the first episode, like I said, it's the Lion, who is kind of like a turncoat, turned against the Dora Milaje and turned against Wakanda and the War Dogs. And Noni is sent out, and you get to see a fight between the two. She ultimately defeats him, or he kind of like self-sacrifices, I guess, like kamikaze blows himself up. Spoilers, I suppose, but I don't really think that this is a very spoilery show. And she gets like blown into the water. There are all these ships and stuff, and she sees all the artifacts going down into the water, and the only one that she's able to get is the mask, which we get to see a little cameo of a little bit later on. But that's essentially the first episode, and it sets up the future episodes for, okay, we've got to get the rest of these artifacts. So there's a lot of time jumps around in this show, and each episode takes place in a very different timeline. This second episode took place, I believe, 60 years after the first one, and it follows the War for Troy, which I was really shocked that they were going to do like a real-life world event, and I love when they do that. I was really, really excited for this, and we got to see Achilles, we got to see Odysseus, we got to see Helen of Troy. It was a really interesting episode, and like I said, I love when they do this. I love when superhero films are set in real world events and have kind of like some sort of influence. But this is what I was talking about with like, they have policies and decrees and laws about how they don't want to get involved in other people's affairs, but then at the same time they've got no choice. They have to get involved if they want to get pieces of their culture back. So you get to see Bakai inside of the Trojan horse that was sent into Troy, and that's an important part of history. And Achilles, we end up getting to see a fight between Bakai and Achilles, because Achilles thought that Bakai was on his side and was fighting alongside him, but Bakai had his own intentions of protecting Wakanda and taking that artifact back to Wakanda, and it was never about fighting alongside Achilles. So Achilles felt betrayed, and the two had a fight, and ultimately Achilles ends up being defeated. And it was a very, very interesting episode, and I thought that, like, out of all four, if I had to pick one that I didn't like, it was probably, like, if I had to pick my least favourite, it would probably be this one. But I still enjoyed it. Like, it was pretty solid. I have a real struggle with animation, which we'll talk about in a little while, because I've got a point for it, but I do struggle with animation, but there was something about, like, the fluidity of this animation that kind of hooked me, and there were a lot of good fight scenes, especially in these first two episodes, that did click with me. So then we got on to episode 3, which is the episode that everyone has been anticipating, because we've got an Iron Fist. Up until this point, we haven't had a Black Panther. It's just been members of Wakanda, members of the War Dogs, members of the Dora Milaje, which, for a bit more context, the War Dogs are kind of like the MI5 of Wakanda. They're like the Spec Ops, the CIA, they're like secret intelligence kind of, you know, the quite literally the CIA of Wakanda, and they're sent out on like secretive missions to retrieve things or whatever. So episode 3 followed the main character Basha, who was in China, kind of undercover, I guess. It's never really explained how he got there or why he got there, but he was in some sort of distraught scenario where he was taken in by our character that ends up being revealed to be Iron Fist. It's quite obvious that she's Iron Fist from the get-go, and a lot of people don't like the fact that they've not only done a female Iron Fist, but a lot of people have taken issue with Iron Fist being an Asian character, which is very, very fucking ironic. But that's social media and Twitter fire. So we get to see Basha essentially, you know, he is taken in by Iron Fist, but he does ultimately betray her, and he takes what has become part of her culture, which is a very, very interesting commentary on the whole cultural artifacts and appropriation. It was a very, very interesting thing that came back up in a conversation later, but essentially Iron Fist ends up tracking Basha back to Wakanda and following him to Wakanda, and they end up having a fight in the artifact room, which is where we get to see a pop-up of the mask from earlier. We get to see multiple different weapons used, and it's a very, very cool moment. It's probably my favourite fight scene out of the lot, and you get like a big Iron Fist charge-up moment, and it's established that like Iron Fist is way too powerful for like these Dora Milaje, War Dog, you know, lower down people in Wakanda that aren't Black Panthers. Like, Iron Fist is just outmatching them because of the sheer level of power that she can harness. And it was very, very cool to see Iron Fist officially for the first canonical time. I know that they've made the Iron Fist Netflix show canon by association, but for now, this is the first Iron Fist that we're seeing, and it's a very, very cool showing for this character. So, the crux of the episode is like, look, fair enough, the artifact that you're after is, you know, part of Wakandan culture, but at the same time, it's now been in our Chinese culture for hundreds of years, and we've now made it part of our culture, which I thought was really, really interesting, because a lot of people talk about, like, things that people take from other cultures and appropriate into their own, and they talk about it like it's a negative thing, and I don't think it is always a negative thing. I think it's a natural thing, and this show kind of, at least in my opinion, for whatever weight that carries, I thought that they did a good job of kind of bringing that conversation up and talking about it. And yeah, this had one of the best fight scenes in the episode for me, in the show for me, and I think that this episode was probably my favourite, even though I didn't really enjoy the start of it. Like, the second half of it was very, very strong. And again, cool to see an Iron Fist. The Iron Fist design was really great as well. So then we had the last episode, which focused on the characters Kuda and Tafari, and finally, a Black Panther. Now, I assumed, because I'd seen a picture of Black Panther's outfit prior to watching the show, I assumed we were going to get an episode set in the future, like a sort of 2099 Black Panther themed kind of thing. And we sort of do. We get to see Kuda and Tafari discovering an artifact. And I'll be honest, the story for this, I did kind of get lost a little bit. Looking back at it, actually, now that I'm trying to think of what this episode was about aside from the future storyline. And I think this might be my least favourite episode. I think I would put this one at the bottom, because it did lose me a little bit, and it, like, my attention while watching it was, okay, I want to get back to the futuristic storyline, because that stuff's interesting. I've had enough of the stuff in the past now. Now that you've introduced the future shit, I want to go back to the future shit. So it did lose me a little bit. There's a self-sacrifice from Kuda, and, well, not a self-sacrifice. You know, he kind of saves Kuda and gets injured in the process. He doesn't die. But, I'll be real, I cannot remember what really happens. Even though it was the last episode I watched as well, I just did not pay attention to it. I was so intrigued in the concept of the last Black Panther and how the story wrapped up. So, essentially a Black Panther travels from the future where, a couple of 100 years in the future, Wakanda and Earth are being attacked by an enemy known as the Horde. And the Horde are from the comics. It is a very deep cut into the comics. They're not very well known or very well used, as far as I can tell. I have no idea much about them. I just know that they're kind of celestial related. And essentially they invade Earth. And because Wakanda, for so long, has kept to itself, the rest of Earth failed. And so that left Wakanda on its own. And so they failed. So the moral of the story for Wakanda at that point was, okay, well, shit. We need to go back in time and trigger something that will lead to Wakanda opening its gates and interacting with the rest of the world, starting trade treaties, joining the UN, that kind of thing, right? And then that's when you get the reveal. All of this leads to Killmonger, which was a really, really great reveal for me. I wasn't really expecting it. I knew that I'd seen somebody on social media mention Killmonger, but I didn't think that it would tie so heavily into him to the point where, like, it shows the importance that he has and the story of Black Panther 1, because a lot of people just say, okay, well, it's a Lion King ripoff, which, yeah, it is. But at the end of the day, they're now adding in some extra stuff, which they do in the comics all the time for events. Even now we're getting tie-ins to the 2015 Secret Wars event. And so it's not, out of the realm of possibility that they retcon some extra stuff in. This entire series shows that, like, these artifacts need to be out there because somebody further in the future is going to discover them and is going to lead to the events of Wakanda opening its gates. So while it might be important to reclaim some of them now, it can't be our only purpose. There are bigger things, basically. And they put all of their faith in the concept of, Killmonger, seeing the artifacts, being prompted in the same way that these people have, that the War Dogs have in these earlier episodes, and sort of inciting the events of Black Panther 1. So it's a very, very cool retcon. Whether or not you're supposed to watch this before Black Panther or after Black Panther is up for debate. Chronologically, it's the first thing in the timeline, and it doesn't spoil anything for Black Panther, I don't feel like. So you could watch it before or after when it comes to, like, a marathon of the MCU. Is it worth watching? I think so. I think it was pretty good. The animation style in particular is completely different from What If, which has received a lot of flack for its style. And Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man also did, but I think that was trying to be its own thing. And I enjoyed the art style for Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. I did not finish the show, I will eventually, but I did enjoy the art style for it, and I thought it was very cool, like a very cool visual to look at. This seemed to be kind of like they were injecting like 10% of Arcane in here. They had some really caricature designs, I guess, and like these watercolor washed out backdrops a lot of the time. So I got the impression that they were trying to kind of like lean into that art style that Arcane has gone for, but like not go too hard into it, that it's like brutally obvious. I thought that the animation was very, very cool. It was very smooth, which helped when it got to the fight scenes and stuff. Like, the fights weren't choppy or anything. They kind of had some weight to them, and they kind of moved quite well, which I liked. So yeah, usually I don't do well with animation. Usually, like, I've never gotten into the DC animated universe. I've never really watched, aside from like some episodes of X-Men 97, I never watched a lot of like old DC Marvel cartoons or like that. So going into this is why my standards were, and like my expectations were so low, was because the interest level kind of drops for me the moment that I see its animation. I really struggle with that, and it's something that I'm trying to get better with. But yeah, I think that the animation being the way that it is here definitely helped, and definitely lent itself to being something that even I could watch. Overall, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. which initially I feel like I was being quite harsh with giving it a 6 out of 10. I was like, I gave Ironheart a 7. But I enjoyed Ironheart a hell of a lot more than I enjoyed this. And while I really enjoyed the ideas here, I can't help but feel like there was a better format to do this in. And I think that they really should lean into the fact that they are basing their stuff off of comics. And I think that a much better format for stuff like this in the future would be to do tie-in comics on, like, for the MCU. I would love to read like a limited 4-issue series where these stories are in comic book form on Marvel Unlimited, or even physically in like a TP, and learn about stuff that is still canon to the MCU and links to the MCU. And I know that, you know, reading comic books is not a format for everybody, but people aren't watching these shows. They're not being properly advertised, which I think is the thing that is getting people. And they're being dropped in bulk on these streaming services. And I feel like if we had a scenario where it was an issue releasing weekly, even if it was a digital format, even if it was an Infinity comic, I think it would be a lot cooler. And I think it would be good for people that are collectors, people that want to be completionists, to have an MCU where you've got MCU action figures, MCU TV shows on DVD, steelbooks, you know, MCU Blu-rays, and then you've got MCU comic books. I think this would have worked better as a comic book series. And I think that there's been a couple of things that they're doing, such as What If, and I think Marvel Zombies, all ironically the animated stuff, and Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, though, again, I can't attest too much to that because I haven't finished it. But I think that these are all projects that, if they're meant to be canon, or they're meant to be within the realm of the MCU, do them in comic book form. I know that Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man kind of like, you know, it starts off vaguely canon and then goes off into its own thing. If the intention for that show was for it to be a canon origin story for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, do it as a comic. Why not? You know, fucking like a variant of Scarlet Witch from the MCU popped up in a TVA comic recently. The TVA, which is an MCU creation, popped up in comics and has its own comics run. So why not? Why not? I think it would be way, way cooler. I would have appreciated this a lot more because, like, the concept of having something that is set in the MCU but could also be set in the comics as well. Like, all of these stories could also be related to comics and could also be the history of Wakanda in the comics. So I like stuff like that, where it can be either or. And again, I just think that this would have been a much better format in comic book form. I think that the stories were interesting concepts. I think some of them were kind of lacking in some places, and I think that the pacing was a little bit weak for the majority of the episodes here. A lot of the episodes kind of, I would zone out of like half of the episode and then zone back in when it got interesting again. Some of the episodes had like slower moments, which, again, work, I think, a little bit better when it's in a comic book format. And I also think that the importance of this show, yes, it links to Black Panther, and yes, it leads to Killmonger, but it doesn't have any ripple effect. We're never going to see these characters again. We're never going to see this version of Iron Fist again. So, for me, it feels less essential, and it feels like an optional watch. And I enjoy stuff that, I'm not going to go into the argument of like, oh, well, I didn't ask for this, because I didn't ask for Agatha all along, and I didn't ask for Thunderbolts, and I love both of those. But both of those also, in their own right, feel important. Didn't ask for them, and they're creatively and artistically different from a lot of other stuff in the MCU, but they're also important. They also have good stories and weight to them. And while this has good stories, they don't have weight, because, again, you know, that future with the Horde invading Wakanda is now never going to happen. And these characters that we saw in the past, we're never going to see again. So, that's my view on it. I think that if this show had a little bit more weight to it, and if the show, I don't really know how I would even improve it. It was just like a very run-of-the-mill kind of mid kind of show with some cool action sequences in and the cool tie into Black Panther, and that's kind of how I feel about it. My brain just immediately goes 6. 5 feels too low and 7 feels too high, so I've gone with 6. I don't know where else to go. But yeah, that was my kind of review and breakdown of Eyes of Wakanda. Are you going to watch this show? Have you watched this show? Would you recommend the show? I don't know. I don't really know what else to say about it. But yeah, let me know what you thought of it. What do you think about Disney yet again dumping a show in bulk on their streaming service? And I will see you guys in whatever the next video shall be. Bye bye.